There is a letter in the historical records of Tucson, Arizona Territory that was written in the spring of 1891 by a 22-year-old woman named Clara Mae Denton. It is 3 pages long. It is written in a careful hand on paper that shows signs of having been folded and unfolded many times. The way a letter gets folded and unfolded when someone has been carrying it close to their body for a long time before they finally sent it. The letter is addressed to the territorial marshal's office, and it begins with a single sentence that the archivist who cataloged it in 1923 noted in the margins as the most extraordinary opening to any document in the entire collection. The sentence is this: "I am writing to tell you where Frank Denton will be on the morning of April 14th. And I am writing to tell you that if you send anyone other than Marshal Cole Reeves to take him, I will warn my father and he will not be there." Clara Mae Denton had just turned in her own father to the man she loved, on the condition that the man she loved was the one who went to get him. Because she believed, and she had reasons for believing this that nobody else in the Arizona Territory fully understood, that Cole Reeves was the only lawman alive who would bring Frank Denton in without killing him. And Frank Denton's life, despite every single thing he had done in it, was not something Clara Mae Denton was willing to spend. Stay with me, because what this woman did, and why she did it, and what it cost her, is one of the most extraordinary true stories of love and loyalty and impossible choice that the American frontier ever produced. And the ending is nothing like what you were expecting. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what Clara Mae Denton did and why she did it, you need to understand 3 things that this story is going to reveal to you one layer at a time. The first is this: who was Frank Denton and what had he done that made the entire Arizona Territory want him dead and made his own daughter willing to give him up? The second is this: who was Cole Reeves, and what was it about this particular lawman that made Clara Mae trust him with the most dangerous thing she had ever done? And the third, the question underneath all the others, the one that this story ultimately turns on, is this: when Clara Mae Denton made her choice on that April morning in 1891, who exactly was she saving? Her father, or the man she loved, or herself? And is there a version of that choice where she managed to save all 3? Those questions do not resolve easily. The frontier rarely produced easy resolutions. But what it produced in this case was something rarer and more valuable than easy. It produced the truth. And the truth, when it finally arrived in the Arizona Territory in the spring of 1891, was something that everyone who was there said they had not seen coming, including the 2 men at the center of it, including Clara Mae herself. The Arizona Territory in 1885 was not a place that rewarded hesitation. It was a landscape of extraordinary harsh beauty, red rock and flat dust, and sky so enormous it made a person feel simultaneously insignificant and absolutely exposed. And it attracted the kind of people that landscapes like that attract. People who needed the distance. People who needed the anonymity of size. People who had things behind them that they preferred not to have followed them, and had chosen a place where following was difficult and asking questions was considered poor form. The town of Morro Wells sat in the southeastern corner of the territory near the New Mexico border, close enough to the mountains to feel their shadow in the afternoon and far enough from everything else to feel genuinely abandoned by the rest of human civilization on its harder days. It had a population of approximately 350 people in 1885, and it had a relationship with the law that was best described as theoretical. There was a sheriff. He was largely decorative. The real authority in Morro Wells and the 40 miles of territory around it was a more informal arrangement involving several competing interests, none of which had been elected by anyone. Frank Denton arrived in Morro Wells in the summer of 1875 with a 10-year-old girl on the horse behind him and a history in 3 states that he had no intention of discussing with anyone. He was 42 years old, lean and weathered, and carrying the particular stillness of a man who has been in enough dangerous situations to have learned that stillness is the most effective form of self-protection available. He had dark eyes that assessed everything before committing to anything and hands that were always slightly ahead of the rest of him in any situation that required speed. The girl was Clara Mae. Her mother had died the previous winter in a small Colorado town in circumstances that Frank spoke about to no one. What he did with Clara Mae from that point forward was raise her. Not perfectly. Not conventionally, not in any way that a schoolteacher or a minister would have endorsed, but with a completeness and a genuine devotion that the people of Morro Wells, who saw more than Frank realized, recognized as the realest thing about a man who kept everything else carefully hidden. He taught her to ride before she could read well. He taught her to shoot before she could cook. He taught her to read a landscape for danger, to assess a room the moment she entered it, to trust her instincts about people faster than her manners. He also taught her, and this is the detail that matters most for understanding what she eventually did, to distinguish between the law and justice. He told her they were not always the same thing. He told her that knowing the difference was what separated people who survived from people who did not. He told her this as someone who had organized his entire life around the gap between those two things. And Clara Mae listened. She always listened to Frank. But she listened the way a child listens to someone they love completely and agree with selectively, taking in everything and reserving the right to reach her own conclusions later. What Frank Denton was, stripped of the careful performance of ordinary ranching life he maintained in Morro Wells, was one of the most wanted men in the Arizona Territory. He ran a network of cattle rustling and cross-border smuggling operations that had been operating with remarkable efficiency and almost complete impunity since 1878. He was not violent by preference. He was pragmatic. Violence attracted attention, and Frank Denton's entire professional philosophy was built on not attracting attention. But he was not nonviolent by principle either. And there were incidents in his history that the territorial marshal's office had documented with the patient thoroughness of an organization that had been trying to catch Frank Denton for 7 years and kept finding the evidence one step behind the man. Clara Mae knew some of this. She was not naive, and Frank had not raised her to be. She knew that what her father did after dark was not ranching. She did not know the full extent of it, and she had spent her teenage years constructing a careful internal architecture that allowed her to love Frank Denton completely without requiring herself to approve of everything Frank Denton did. It was a complicated structure. It held. Until Cole Reeves rode into Morro Wells in the fall of 1888. Cole Reeves did not come to Morro Wells looking for Frank Denton. He came because he was posted there. He had no idea that the rancher with the quiet daughter who sometimes brought supplies to the general store on Friday mornings was the man whose file he had been reading for 3 years. And Frank Denton had no idea that the new territorial deputy with the steady eyes and the unhurried manner was the most dangerous thing that had ever walked into his carefully constructed life. Cole Reeves was 30 years old when he rode into Morro Wells, and he was a lawman the way certain men are lawmen. Not because of the authority it gave him, but because of the order it let him try to make out of a landscape that was always threatening to dissolve back into chaos. He had grown up in New Mexico in a family that had lost 3 members to frontier violence before he was 15 years old, and he had made the decision at 15 that the law was the only instrument available to a person who wanted to change that pattern rather than simply survive it. He was not the fastest gun in the Arizona Territory. He was not the most feared. What he was, and what made him exceptional in ways that only became visible over time, was patient and precise and possessed of a quality of honest assessment that made people tell him things they had not planned to tell anyone. He asked questions that got under the performance people put on for authority and reached the actual person beneath. He remembered details. He kept his word without exception, and he had a reputation in 3 territories for never having killed a man he could have brought in alive. That last detail was the one Clara Mae Denton fixed on the moment she heard it. She heard it 6 weeks after Cole Reeves arrived in Morro Wells, from a woman at the dry goods store who had it from her husband, who had it from someone passing through from Tucson. Clara Mae heard it, and she stored it in the same careful way she stored everything that might eventually matter. She did not know yet that it would matter more than anything else she had ever learned. But she stored it, just in case. She and Cole Reeves met formally for the first time at a town gathering in November of 1888. He was 30. She was 19. And what happened between them in the following months was the kind of thing that happens when 2 people who have both spent their entire lives being more careful than their age required finally meet someone with whom carefulness feels unnecessary. They were not reckless. Neither of them knew how to be reckless. But they were honest with each other in a way that both of them had been too careful to be honest with anyone before. And honesty, between 2 people who have been starved of it, is the most powerful thing in the world. Clara Mae Denton at 20 years old was the product of everything Frank had taught her and everything she had decided for herself in the space between his lessons. She was not a simple person. She was not a person who could be reduced to her loyalties or her loves or her history without losing something essential about who she actually was. She had her father's eyes, the ones that assessed everything before committing, and her mother's quality of stillness, which Frank had described to her once as the ability to be completely present in a room without requiring the room to know you were there. She loved Frank Denton with the particular fierce, uncomplicated love of a child who has been raised by one parent who showed up completely. She understood that Frank was not a good man by the standards the law used to measure goodness. She had made her peace with that understanding years ago. What she had not made her peace with, and what Cole Reeves' arrival in Morro Wells was steadily making more difficult to maintain, was the growing awareness that her father's life was not sustainable, that the territorial marshal's office was closing the distance, that Frank Denton's careful, invisible operation was becoming more visible every year, and that the day was coming. It was always coming, when she would not be able to stand in two places at once anymore. It'd be why the winter of 1893 things were simultaneously true in Morro Wells that could not remain simultaneously true for much longer. Frank Denton's operation had expanded in ways that had attracted the attention of the territorial marshal's office at its highest levels. Cole Reeves had been quietly accumulating evidence about the rustling operation for over a year without yet knowing who was at the center of it. And Clara Mae Denton was in love with Cole Reeves with a completeness that she had stopped trying to qualify or contain. Three things pointed directly at each other, and Clara Mae standing in the middle of all three. That the evidence came together for Cole Reeves on a Tuesday in January of 1891 in the form of a cattle brand discrepancy in a bill of sale that he had been cross-referencing with reports from 3 other counties for the better part of 6 months. He sat at his desk in the Morro Wells deputy's office with the documents spread in front of him, and he followed the thread the way he always followed threads, methodically, without excitement, one verifiable fact connecting to the next, until the thread led him somewhere he had not expected. It led him to the Denton Ranch 3 miles south of Morro Wells. And it led him to a name he had been reading in territorial marshal reports for 3 years. Frank Denton. Cole Reeves sat with that information for 1 full day before he did anything with it. He sat with it the way a careful man sits with something that is going to change everything. Not because he was uncertain about what the evidence showed, but because he was acutely aware of what the evidence meant beyond the legal facts. It meant Clara Mae. It meant every conversation they had ever had. It meant the specific quality of honesty they had built between them and what it was going to cost when she found out that he had known, even for 1 day, and had not told her. He went to see her the following evening. He did not tell her what he had found. He sat across from her in Frank's kitchen with Frank absent, and he looked at her face, and he made a decision that he would question for the rest of his life. He gave her 3 days. Not because the law required it. Because he loved her, and he could not make himself not give her 3 days. Clara Mae found out that Cole was investigating her father not from Cole, but from Frank. Frank told her on a Thursday morning in February with the particular directness of a man who has been managing risk for 20 years and recognizes when a variable has changed. He did not know it was Cole specifically. He knew a deputy was pulling records that pointed toward his operation. He told Clara Mae because he trusted her assessment of people more than his own by that point, and because he needed to know whether the new deputy was the kind of man who could be redirected or the kind of man who could not. Clara Mae sat with that information for longer than Frank expected. Then she asked him one question. She asked, "Papa, if they take you, will you fight them?" Frank looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Clara Mae, I have always fought everything that came for me." She said, "I know." And then she got up from the table and went outside and stood in the cold February morning for a very long time. What she was doing in that cold February morning, what she spent the next 6 weeks doing in every private moment she had, was calculating, not coldly, with the specific anguished precision of someone who loves 2 people completely and is trying to find a version of the future where both of them survive. She was looking for a version where Frank surrendered without being killed. She was looking for a lawman who would take him alive. And she had heard, 6 weeks after Cole Reeves arrived in Morro Wells, from a woman at the dry goods store, that Cole Reeves had never killed a man he could bring in alive. What Clara Mae did over the next 6 weeks, The conversations she had with Cole, without ever telling him what she was really asking, was one of the most careful and deliberate acts of love that the Arizona Territory ever witnessed. And it ended with a 3-page letter written on paper that she folded and unfolded many times before she finally sent it. Clara Mae wrote the letter on a Sunday night, in late March of 1891, with Frank asleep in the next room, and Cole's face in her mind, and the full weight of what she was doing sitting on her chest like the flat red rocks of the Arizona landscape. She told the territorial marshal's office exactly where Frank Denton would be on the morning of April 14th. She told them that he would be alone. She told them the approach that would give the arresting officer the best chance of taking him without violence. And she told them, in the sentence that the archivist noted in the margins 30 years later, that she required Cole Reeves to be the one who went, because she believed he was the only lawman who would bring Frank Denton in alive. And if Frank Denton was not brought in alive, she would hold the marshal's office personally responsible for what her father's death had cost. She sealed the letter. She carried it in her dress for 4 days. And then on a Thursday morning, she rode to the next town and posted it. The territorial marshal's office received Clara Mae's letter on a Monday morning, and the marshal, a man named David Holt who had been pursuing Frank Denton for 7 years, read it 3 times before he called anyone else into the room. What Clara Mae had provided was operationally specific enough to be either a genuine tip from someone with inside knowledge or a sophisticated misdirection designed to send his best deputy into an ambush. He spent 2 days attempting to verify the information through other channels. Everything checked out. Frank Denton would be at the location Clara Mae had specified on April 14th. David Holt sent for Cole Reeves. What he did not tell Cole Reeves immediately, and this is the detail that makes the next part of this story so extraordinary, was who the tip had come from. He gave Cole the operational information. He told him Frank Denton's location and timing. He told him to go alone and to attempt a peaceful surrender before anything else. And he sent Cole out of his office with the full operational picture and no knowledge of the one fact that would have changed everything about how Cole approached what came next. Cole Reeves prepared for the April 14th operation with his usual methodical care. He reviewed everything he knew about Frank Denton. He planned his approach. He prepared for the 3 most likely scenarios: peaceful surrender, resistance, flight. He wrote a letter to Clara Mae that he did not send. He wrote it and folded it and put it in his desk drawer because he could not find words for what he needed to say to her that did not require him to tell her things he was not yet authorized to tell her. He rode out toward the location on the morning of April 14th in the specific state of focused calm that he had learned to inhabit before anything dangerous, present, prepared, and holding everything else in a part of himself he would deal with afterward. He did not know that Clara Mae had written the letter. He did not know that the tip had come from her. He did not know. And this is the detail that would take him the longest to process after it was all over. That the reason he was the one riding out that morning was because the woman he loved had insisted on it. What happened at that location on the morning of April 14th was not what Clara Mae had planned. It was not what Cole had planned. And it was not what Frank Denton had expected. Because Frank Denton had a visitor that morning that nobody had anticipated. And that visitor changed every calculation that 3 people had made. What nobody had accounted for was that Frank Denton was not alone on the morning of April 14th. 2 men from his operation, men named in the territorial records only as Briggs and Carver, had shown up at the location the previous evening and had stayed overnight without Frank's invitation or approval. They were not men who would surrender peacefully. They were not men who had Clara Mae's careful calculation about the value of staying alive. They were men who had warrants in 2 territories and nothing to lose, and the particular willingness to use violence that comes from having already used it enough times that it has stopped requiring justification. Cole Reeves arrived at the location to find not 1 man, but 3. And the peaceful surrender he had prepared for became something considerably more complicated in the first 30 seconds of his approach. The account of what happened on the morning of April 14, 1891 comes from 3 sources. Cole Reeves' official report, Frank Denton's own statement made during his arraignment, and a letter that Clara Mae wrote to her closest friend in Morro Wells 4 months after the events took place. All 3 accounts agree on the essential facts. They differ only in the details that each person needed to emphasize about their own role in what happened. Cole arrived. He identified himself. He addressed Frank Denton directly, and told him he was placing him under arrest. Frank Denton looked at Cole Reeves for a long moment, the careful assessing look that his daughter had inherited, and then he looked at Briggs and Carver standing behind him. And then he did something that Cole Reeves noted in his official report as the thing that probably saved all of their lives. Frank Denton raised both hands and said, "Boys, put them down. This one we take peacefully." Briggs did not comply. Carver did. What happened in the next 40 seconds involved two shots, one of which Cole fired and one of which Frank Denton fired. Frank, who had raised both hands and told his men to stand down, had not been entirely unarmed. And when it was over, Briggs was on the ground with a wound that would take him out of commission but not out of the world. Frank Denton was in handcuffs, and Cole Reeves was standing in the Arizona dust with a question forming in his mind that he would not have the answer to for another 4 hours. Why had Frank Denton told his men to stand down? Frank Denton did not stand down. Frank Denton had never in his life made it easy for anyone to take him. What had changed? The answer came 4 hours later in the Morrow Wells deputy's office when David Holt arrived and Cole Reeves finally learned where the tip had come from. Holt told him about the letter. He told him about the condition Clara Mae had attached to it. He told him that the reason Cole had been sent was because Frank Denton's daughter had specifically required it. And Cole Reeves sat in his office chair with that information and understood, in the specific way that a precise man understands something when all the pieces finally arrange themselves, why Frank Denton had told his men to stand down. Frank Denton had known, not about the letter specifically, but he had known that whoever had given Cole Reeves the information had done it to keep him alive. And there was only one person in the Arizona territory who wanted Frank Denton alive badly enough and knew enough about his operation to give that information with that precision. Frank had stood in that dust with his hands raised and Cole Reeves in front of him, and he had understood with the absolute clarity of a father who knows his daughter better than she knows herself that this moment, this specific careful arrangement, had been made by Clara Mae. And Frank Denton, who had never in his life stood down for the law, stood down for his daughter. Cole rode to the Denton ranch that evening. Clara Mae was on the porch when he arrived. She watched him ride up, and she did not move, and she did not say anything, because she knew from his face that he knew. And Cole dismounted and stood at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at her for a long time. And then he said, "You could have told me." Clara Mae said, "If I had told you, you would have tried to find another way." Cole said yes. She said, "There was no other way. And I needed him to come home alive more than I needed you to know." Cole Reeves stood at the bottom of those porch steps for another long moment. Then he walked up them, and he sat down beside her. And neither of them said anything else for a very long time. Frank Denton was tried in the Tucson Territorial Court in the fall of 1891. He was convicted on 4 counts of cattle rustling and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud. He was sentenced to 8 years in the Territorial Penitentiary. His lawyer, paid for by Clara Mae with money she had been quietly saving for 3 years, which tells you something about how long she had been preparing for this possibility, argued for leniency on the grounds of Frank's cooperation at the time of arrest. The judge noted Frank's decision to stand down in his sentencing remarks. Frank served 5 years and was released in 1896. Clara Mae and Cole Reeves were married in the spring of 1892 in a small ceremony in Morrow Wells attended by approximately 40 people. The territorial Marshal David Holt attended. He and Frank Denton had exchanged letters during Frank's imprisonment, a correspondence that began when Holt wrote to Frank asking a question about a different case, and which continued because both men, it turned out, had a great deal to say to each other that had nothing to do with crime or law. Frank was not at the wedding. He sent a letter instead. The letter was 3 sentences long. The first sentence said he was sorry he could not be there. The second said that Cole Reeves was the only man he had ever met that he would have chosen for Clara Mae himself. The third sentence said, "Tell her I understand. Tell her I understood the moment I raised my hands." Cole Reeves became the territorial marshal of the southeastern Arizona district in 1894. He served in that position for 11 years. His record during those 11 years of never having killed a man he could bring in alive remained unbroken. People who worked with him during those years said that he talked about Frank Denton more than you might expect a lawman to talk about the man who had been his first major arrest. They said he talked about him the way you talk about someone who taught you something important. When people asked what Frank Denton had taught him, Cole always said the same thing. He said, "He taught me that the difference between the law and justice is real. and that sometimes the most honest thing a person can do is know the difference and act on it anyway, even when it costs them everything. Frank Denton walked out of the Territorial Penitentiary on a Tuesday morning in 1896 to find Clara Mae waiting for him with a horse and a packed bag and no particular plan beyond the fact that she was there. He looked at her for a long moment in the way that people look at each other when they have been through something that tested whether the thing between them was real. Then he said, "Where's Reeves?" She said, "Home. Waiting for both of us." Frank nodded. He took the horse, and they rode toward Morro Wells together in the early morning light with the red Arizona rocks on both sides of the road and the sky enormous above them the way it always was in that territory. Vast and indifferent and breathtaking all at once. I want to leave you with the question that Clara Mae Denton's 3-page letter has been asking me since I first found it in a Tucson archive. When she wrote that letter, when she gave up her father's location to the man she loved on the condition that the man she loved was the one who went, who exactly was she saving? She was saving Frank from being killed by a lawman with less patience and less principle than Cole Reeves. She was saving Cole from going into a situation without the specific advantage that her inside knowledge could give him. And she was saving herself from the version of the future where she had to choose between them because one of them was dead. But here is the thing about Clara Mae's choice that I keep coming back to. She did not save anyone without cost. Frank went to prison. Cole spent years carrying the knowledge that the woman he loved had made a decision without him that involved both their lives. And Clara Mae spent 5 years visiting a prison and building a marriage simultaneously and carrying the full weight of a choice that she had made alone because she believed she was the only one who could see clearly enough to make it. Was she right? Was that the only way? And here is the question I want you to sit with. When you are the person standing in the middle between two people you cannot afford to lose, is the most loving thing you can do the thing that saves them both? Or is it the thing that tells them the truth and lets them choose for themselves? Clara Mae Denton chose to save them. It cost her something that she never fully described in any letter she ever wrote. But Frank walked out of that prison to find her waiting. And Cole was at home waiting for both of them. And if that is not a version of the ending worth paying the price for, then I am not sure what is. So drop a comment below and tell me, would you have done what Clara Mae did? Would you have made that choice alone? Or would you have told the truth and let the two men in your life figure it out for themselves? I want to know, because I think the answer says everything about who you are. And I read every single comment. If this story moved you, if it reached something real, please subscribe. I find these stories every week. The ones that happened to real people in real places who were trying to do the most impossible thing that love ever asks of anyone. Hold on to everyone they love when everything is pulling them apart. New story every single week. You do not want to miss what is coming next. And if you thought this story was extraordinary, wait until you hear what happened to the woman who rode into a Texas town with a dead man across her saddle and a story nobody believed. That one is coming very soon. This has been just one more story. Thanks for watching. Subscribe now for more interesting stories.